Something is about to begin in your life, and the strangest part is that it won't feel like a beginning at all. It won't arrive with fireworks or a clear sign or a voice from the sky telling you that this is the moment everything changes. It will arrive quietly, disguised as restlessness, as a vague dissatisfaction you can't quite name, as the feeling that you're standing at the edge of something without being able to see what's on the other side. Most people miss it entirely. They walk right past the door of their own transformation because it looked nothing like a door. Carl Jung spent his life studying the exact moment you may be standing in right now. He watched hundreds of people arrive at this threshold, and what struck him was how few of them recognized it for what it was. They came to him convinced they were lost, convinced something had gone wrong, convinced that the unease they felt was a symptom to be cured. What Jung saw instead was a summons. He believed that at certain points in a person's life, something deep within the psyche begins to call, quietly at first, then with increasing insistence. And this call is the beginning of the only life that was ever truly meant to be yours. He had a word for this. He spoke of it as a kind of vocation, a calling that doesn't come from the outside world, but from the deepest layer of who you are. And he warned that answering it is the most important and most terrifying thing a human being will ever do. Today I want to walk you through what Jung understood about this hidden beginning, why it disguises itself as confusion, why some part of you will fight it with everything it has, what actually gets asked of you when the call arrives, and why the people who answer it describe the years that follow as the first time they were ever genuinely alive. If you've been feeling that quiet pull lately, that sense that something in you is stirring and you don't know what it wants, there's a good chance you're closer to the start of something real than you've ever been. Think about the hour before dawn. There's a moment when the sky is at its darkest and emptiest, when the last of the night has drained away, but the light hasn't arrived yet. And if you didn't know better, you'd assume nothing was coming. The world looks finished, cold, still, gray at the edges. And yet that emptiness is precisely the condition for the light. The darkness isn't the opposite of the dawn, it's the announcement of it. The sky has to empty completely before it can fill with color. Jung understood that the human psyche goes through the same hour before its own dawns. There's a period where everything you've relied on to know who you are begins to feel thin and colorless. The roles you played, the goals you chased, the picture of the future you'd been carrying, all of it starts to lose its brightness. And the ego, which is the part of you that manages your daily identity, reads this loss of color as a catastrophe. It assumes the light is gone for good. It doesn't understand that it's standing in the blue hour of a new beginning. This is the first thing almost everyone gets wrong about the most important transition of their life. They expect it to feel like progress. They expect motivation, momentum, a clear direction pulling them forward. What they actually get is stillness, a strange flatness where the old excitement used to be. The things that used to light them up register as ordinary now, and nothing new has arrived to replace them. It feels like stalling. It feels like failure. And in a culture that treats every uncomfortable feeling as a malfunction, the immediate instinct is to fix it, to fill it, to make the discomfort stop as fast as possible. Jung would have told you to do the opposite. He would have told you to stay in the dark a little longer, because the emptiness you're so desperate to escape is the very ground the new life needs in order to take root. Where does this call actually come from? Jung believed the psyche is far larger than the small, managing part of us we usually identify with. Beneath the surface personality, the one that gets up in the morning, answers to your name, worries about your responsibilities, there exists something he called the self. The self is the total blueprint of who you are, including everything you've become and everything you've never allowed yourself to be. And the self has an agenda of its own. It wants to be lived fully. It wants the whole design expressed, not just the acceptable fragments you've been showing the world. For most of your life, the self can be ignored. You're busy building. You're constructing an identity, earning a place, meeting expectations, becoming the person everyone around you agreed you should be. And this construction serves a purpose. You needed the roles and the structures to survive, to function, to make your way. But there comes a point when the structure is finished, when the identity is fully built, and the self looks at what you've made and recognizes that it's too small. that there's a whole dimension of you standing unused, waiting, pressing against the walls of the life you settled into. That pressure is the call. It's the self trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that the first half of your life was preparation, and now something much more essential wants to begin. Jung noticed that this call rarely speaks in words. It communicates through mood, through dreams, through the sudden loss of interest in things that used to matter, through an ache that has no obvious cause. You might find yourself moved to tears by things that never affected you before. You might feel a pull towards something, a place, a kind of work, a way of living that makes no logical sense and won't leave you alone. You might catch yourself standing in the middle of your own successful life, feeling like a stranger in it, wondering how you ended up here and who exactly made these choices. These experiences aren't signs that you're breaking down. They're the language of the deeper personality trying to reach the surface. And the more you ignore that language, the louder and stranger it tends to get. Here's what makes this so difficult. The part of you that built your current life does not want to hear this call, and it will do everything in its considerable power to drown it out. Jung understood that the ego experiences the summons of the self as a threat, because answering it means the ego has to give up its position at the center. It means admitting that the life you constructed, however impressive, was incomplete. And nothing resists that admission more fiercely than the identity you spent decades assembling. So the ego fights back, and it fights in ways that are almost impossible to detect because it uses your own voice to do it. It tells you that the restlessness is just a phase, that you're being ungrateful, that you have everything a person should want and you're foolish to feel unsatisfied. It reminds you of everything you'd lose. It conjures every reasonable, responsible, sensible argument for staying exactly where you are. And these arguments are seductive precisely because many of them are true. You would lose things. It would be disruptive. There are no guarantees on the other side. What the ego never admits is the cost of not answering, because there's a specific kind of suffering reserved for people who hear the call and refuse it. A slow dimming. A quiet resignation that hardens over the years into something that looks like contentment from the outside, but feels like a low, constant ache from the inside. Jung saw this in patient after patient who arrived in the second half of life having done everything right and feeling, inexplicably, dead. They'd silenced the call so successfully and for so long that they'd almost forgotten it existed. Almost. There was always a residue. A sense that somewhere back down the road, they'd been offered a life that was genuinely theirs, and they'd said no. This is the choice that sits underneath the discomfort you might be feeling right now. On one side is the familiar, the known, the life that already has a shape you recognize. On the other side is something unnamed, uncertain, and undeniably real. And the tragedy Jung witnessed again and again was how often people chose the familiar, not because they wanted it, but because they couldn't tolerate the fear of the unknown long enough to let the new thing arrive. There's a deeper reason the call is so easy to refuse, and it's worth sitting with. When something authentic begins to stir in you, it doesn't announce itself with confidence. It arrives fragile, tentative, easily dismissed. A new possibility feels nothing like the solid weight of your established life. It's a whisper next to a shout. And so, when you weigh the two, the loud, established, reasonable voice of the life you already have against the faint, uncertain flicker of the life that wants to begin, the established one wins almost every time. It sounds more real. It sounds like the adult, responsible choice. Meanwhile, the whisper gets easier to ignore with each passing day, until one morning you realize you can't hear it at all. Jung believed that learning to listen to the whisper, to take the fragile, uncertain, barely there stirrings of the psyche seriously, was one of the most important capacities a person could develop, because the whisper is how the self speaks. It never shouts. It doesn't have to. It has all the time in the world, and it will wait for you across an entire lifetime if it has to, growing quieter and quieter, until answering it becomes almost impossible. If any of this is landing close to home, if you've been sensing that faint pull toward a life that feels more genuinely yours, and you don't quite know how to listen to it, This is exactly the terrain our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built to help you cross. It's 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's approach, designed to help you hear the whisper before it fades, to make sense of the restlessness instead of silencing it. The link is right below, but stay with me here, because there's something crucial about what happens once you actually start to listen. The moment you stop resisting the call, you enter the strangest and most important stretch of the whole journey. Because listening doesn't immediately give you answers, it gives you questions. Sometimes it gives you nothing but a heightened awareness that your old life no longer fits and your new one hasn't formed yet. You've stopped drowning out the whisper, but the whisper doesn't hand you a map. It just keeps pulling you towards something you can't quite see. Jung had a particular respect for this in-between space. He understood that a new beginning isn't a single event, but a passage, and the passage has a middle that feels like nowhere at all. You've left the shore you knew, and the far shore hasn't come into view. There's just water in every direction, and the unsettling recognition that you can't turn back and can't yet arrive. This is where the ego makes its final, most desperate attempt to pull you home. Because the emptiness of the middle passage is more than most people can bear, and the fastest way to end the discomfort is to construct a new identity immediately, to grab the first available role, the first plausible plan, and call it a fresh start. But a beginning built out of panic isn't a beginning. It's the old life wearing a new coat. Jung watched people do this constantly. They'd feel the call, they'd finally answer it, and then, unable to tolerate the uncertainty of the passage, they'd leap into some hastily assembled new version of themselves that carried all the same unconscious patterns as the old one. New job, same emptiness. New relationship, same dynamic. New city, same self. They'd change the scenery without changing anything essential because they couldn't stay in the open water long enough to let the genuine new self take shape. What the genuine beginning requires is something almost no one is taught how to do. It requires you to stand in the not knowing without collapsing it, to hold the question open, to resist the urge to resolve the uncertainty prematurely and instead let the answer emerge from somewhere deeper than your conscious mind can reach. Jung believed that when you can hold that tension, when you can bear to not know who you are for a while, the psyche responds by generating something entirely new. A direction you couldn't have planned, a version of yourself you couldn't have designed on purpose, because it comes from a part of you that the planning mind has no access to. There's an ancient distinction that captures what's happening in this passage. The Greeks had two words for time. One was the ordinary time of clocks and calendars, the steady tick of hours passing. The other was a different kind of time altogether, the decisive moment, the ripe moment, the instant when conditions align and something that was impossible yesterday suddenly becomes possible. Jung was deeply interested in this second kind of time because he recognized that transformation doesn't happen on a schedule. It happens in these charged, ripe moments that you can't force and can't predict, but that you can miss entirely if you're not paying attention. The most important beginning of your life arrives on this second kind of time. It won't come when it's convenient. It won't wait until you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. It arrives at the moment when the old life has finally worn thin enough, and the new one has gathered just enough strength. And in that moment, you either step through or you don't. Jung saw that the people who missed their beginnings usually missed them not through some dramatic refusal, but through hesitation. They waited for more certainty. They waited for the fear to pass. They waited for a better time, and the ripe moment closed while they were still deliberating. This is why the call so often coincides with a kind of pressure, a sense that something has to give. The psyche knows the moment is ripe even when the conscious mind is still stalling, and so it raises the stakes. The dissatisfaction sharpens, the dreams intensify, the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are widens until maintaining the pretense costs more energy than you have. Jung didn't see this pressure as punishment. He saw it as the psyche's way of nudging you toward a door that's only going to stay open for so long. Let me describe what it actually looks like when someone answers. Picture a person who spent 20 years being exactly what everyone needed them to be. Competent at work, dependable at home, the one who held everything together, who never let anyone down, who could be counted on to do the responsible thing every single time. From the outside, a life fully realized. And then, somewhere in their 40s, a quiet erosion began. The competence started to feel hollow. The dependability started to feel like a cage. They'd catch themselves during ordinary moments, driving home, standing in a meeting, lying awake at 2 in the morning, with a thought they couldn't shake. Is this all it was ever going to be? At first, they did what everyone does. They tried to fix the feeling from inside the existing structure. They took a vacation. They set new goals. They threw themselves harder into the roles they'd always played, hoping that more effort would restore the meaning that had drained away. And each attempt brought a little relief before the emptiness seeped back, deeper than before. Because the problem was never a lack of effort. The problem was that the whole structure had done its job and outlived its purpose. And no amount of renovation could change the fact that a different life was pressing to be born. The turning point, when it came, didn't look like a triumph. It looked like a small, almost invisible decision. A moment where they finally admitted, if only to themselves, that they couldn't keep doing this. That the person they'd been performing for 2 decades wasn't the whole of them, and the missing part had waited long enough. That admission cracked something open, and into the crack came fear, disorientation, the terrifying blankness of not knowing who they'd be if they stopped being who they'd always been. But something else came too, a faint, unfamiliar aliveness, the first light at the edge of a very long night. Jung called the larger process at work here individuation, the slow, lifelong movement toward becoming the complete person you were always capable of being. It's the work of gathering up all the scattered, rejected, unlived pieces of yourself and integrating them into a whole. And a genuine new beginning is almost always a chapter of individuation. It's the self reclaiming a part of you that got left behind, insisting that it be lived before your time runs out. What emerges on the other side of the passage is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't been through it, because it isn't a new set of circumstances so much as a new relationship with your own existence. Jung noticed that people who completed a real transition carried themselves differently afterward. They made decisions from a different place, from something solid at their center, rather than from the anxious scanning of what others expected. They could tolerate uncertainty because they'd survived the deepest uncertainty of all, the not knowing of who they were. They stopped performing, and the energy that used to go into maintaining the performance became available for actually living. There's a particular quality Jung observed in these people that's worth naming. They developed the capacity to be alone without being lonely, because somewhere in the passage they discovered that the companionship and validation they'd spent their lives seeking from others was something they could generate from within. They'd met the self, and the self turned out to be a kind of home. That changed everything about how they moved through the world, their relationships, their work, their whole way of being present. They no longer needed other people to complete them, which paradoxically made them far more capable of genuine closeness, because their connection to others was no longer built on need. And here's a pattern Jung found again and again, one that defies ordinary logic. The circumstances that looked most like endings turned out to be the openings. The period of deepest isolation often came right before the arrival of the most authentic relationships of a person's life. The season of total meaninglessness gave birth to a sense of purpose more genuine than anything they'd known when they were busy and successful and empty. The moment they felt most lost turned out to be, in hindsight, the exact moment they finally started heading somewhere real. Jung understood this not as mysticism, but as a psychological law. When the ego's agenda finally exhausts itself, the deeper intelligence of the psyche, which has been watching and waiting the whole time, finally gets room to move. I want to be honest about something, because Jung was always honest about it. This process asks a great deal of you, and it doesn't offer guarantees. Answering the call means letting parts of your old life fall away, and some of what falls away will be painful to lose. There will be people who don't understand. There will be stretches where you question everything, where the fear tells you that you've made a terrible mistake, where the far shore still isn't visible, and you can't remember why you ever left the one you knew. Jung never pretended the crossing was gentle. What he insisted on, based on everything he witnessed, was that it leads somewhere the old life never could, and that the alternative, refusing the call, staying safe, letting the whisper fade, carries a cost that most people don't recognize until it's far too late to pay it back. There's a detail Jung understood that might matter to you if you're standing at the edge right now, afraid you don't have what it takes. The call doesn't come to people who can't answer it. The psyche doesn't initiate a transformation in someone without the resources to survive it. The very fact that this stirring is happening in you at all is evidence that some part of you is ready, more ready than the frightened surface can believe. The self doesn't ask you to become who you truly are until you're capable of bearing the becoming. The restlessness you feel is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're being called precisely because you can respond. That's worth sitting with. The thing that feels most like proof you're falling apart is often the clearest evidence that something in you is strong enough to be reborn. Jung watched the timing of these summons across countless lives, and he came to trust it. The call arrives when you're ready, even when, especially when, you don't feel ready at all. So how do you actually answer? Jung was clear that answering doesn't require a dramatic gesture. You don't have to blow up your entire life in a single afternoon. Answering begins with attention. It begins with taking the whisper seriously instead of dismissing it. It begins with the small, private willingness to admit what you actually feel, what you actually want, what part of you has been standing unused all these years. It begins with turning toward the discomfort instead of medicating it away, with treating your restlessness as a message rather than a malfunction. The dramatic changes, if they come later, and they come more naturally than you'd expect, because once you're genuinely listening, the next step tends to reveal itself. If you're standing in that space right now, feeling the pull, hearing the faint call, wanting to answer but unsure how to even start listening, the reflection exercises in true self-discovery were made for exactly this. They're built around Jung's understanding of how the deeper self communicates, 24 practices designed to help you turn toward the stirring inside you instead of drowning it out, so you can meet the beginning that's trying to reach you. You'll find it linked right below. Let me tell you what the beginning actually feels like once you're in it, because it's not what most people imagine. It doesn't feel like arriving. For a long time, it feels like continuing to walk in the dark, except now you're walking on purpose. The uncertainty doesn't vanish. What changes is your relationship to it. You stop experiencing the not knowing as a threat and start experiencing it as a kind of openness, a space where something new can keep arriving. Jung believed this was the mark of a person who had truly entered the second half of their life, the ability to live inside the question rather than demanding an answer, to trust the process of becoming even when the destination stays hidden. And slowly, in right moments you can't schedule, the far shore comes into view. Not all at once. A detail here, a direction there. A choice that feels, for the first time in years, unmistakably like your own. The work that had gone gray starts to hold color again, or a different kind of work finds you. The relationships built on performance either deepen into something true or fall away to make room for ones that are. The person in the mirror, who felt like a stranger during the passage, gradually becomes someone you recognize, someone more real than the version you'd been performing your whole life. This is the dawn. It doesn't break all at once. It seeps in at the edges of the dark until you realize, almost without noticing, that you can see. Jung spent his final decades convinced that this, the movement toward becoming who you actually are, was the deepest task a human life could hold. Not the accumulation of achievements, not the approval of others, not the construction of an impressive identity, but the quiet, demanding, profoundly worthwhile work of answering the call that comes from the center of your own being and following it into a life that is genuinely, unmistakably yours. He believed the people who did this became, in a sense, fully human for the first time. And he believed the invitation was extended to nearly everyone, though only a few ever recognized it and fewer still said yes. You are, I suspect, closer to that invitation than you think. The restlessness, the flatness, the sense that something is stirring and you don't yet know what it wants. These are not the symptoms of a life going wrong. They are the announcement of a life trying to begin. You're standing in the hour before your own dawn, in the darkest, emptiest part of the sky, and everything in you is insisting that the light is gone for good. But the emptiness is the promise. The dark is the ground the new thing needs. The sky has to empty completely before it fills with color. Your only work right now is to keep standing at the edge, to resist the pull back toward the familiar life that's already finished, to hold the question open a little longer, and then a little longer after that, to take the whisper seriously, to trust that the aliveness flickering underneath your fear is not a trick, but the first light of the most important beginning you will ever live. Jung staked his life's work on the belief that this beginning is real, that it comes to those who are ready, and that answering it, with all its uncertainty and all its cost, is the only thing that ever makes a life fully your own. The door doesn't look like a door, it never does. But you're standing right in front of it, and the light is already starting to come up on the other side. Stay where you are, keep listening, and when the right moment comes, and it's coming, step through. If you haven't yet, take a look at our guide, True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, made for exactly the kind of threshold you may be standing on right now.